For me, knowledge about policy, so not just understanding RAND as an institution, what kinds of issues we work on, but understanding what's a national conversation on European security, for example. If you say you're interested in that, make it clear in your letter that you are knowledgeable and you would be able to bring your expertise to current policy debates. I think you're, depending on, I would emphasize institutional affiliations that you've had that are not just your university. So it's easy to come out of grad school with really quite a thin resume. In terms of you went to school and you stayed there for like 8 years. So, I think being able
and you're still alive.
Yeah. And I think by the time, and other applicants who didn't pursue that will have more stuff. They'll have, maybe they worked for a year at some government agency. Maybe languages is something that is super important to emphasize that often isn't emphasized on CVs because you don't think of that being like a useful skill, but it really is. Most people don't have it. So work experience, institutional affiliations, publications that talk about certain kinds of expertise.
Sure. I mean, I think all that's exactly right. I think for me, because one of the issues that we see with academics is a challenge with being able to think and write concisely, I think you need to have a resume. It should be no more than 2 pages. If you send me a 5-page CV, that's a big, big red flag. So it's got to be an actual resume in resume format. I agree with Stephanie. It should highlight a lot of what you did that's not just the academy. And I think in the same way your cover letter and your resume, you don't want to just list what you've done. Each item on a resume, each paragraph in a cover letter has to be evidence for why you are applying for that position. Mm-hmm. And so again, we talked about this at the beginning, right? If you want to emphasize your teaching because it is a good skill that you can talk about, like Ted said, how to talk to the media, then you need to talk about that as such. Right. And even in the description of what you did as a teacher, that's what you put on it, right? Everything on your resume has to tell that story.
I agree with all that. Do not have 2 to 3 paragraphs where you talk about your thesis. No one cares, right? I mean, honestly, no one cares. You're going to have to mention it, but for God's sakes, even a paragraph I think is probably too much. So all the stuff that you put in the academic letter, take all that stuff and throw it in the trash. That's going to be a positive killer. I would just say that by and large, if you're looking to get the kind of position that you want and that you deserve as a PhD holder at most think tanks, it's probably not going to happen through a genuinely open application process. So I don't discourage people from thinking about the letter or the resume, and I definitely agree with the 2 pages at max. I would actually say 1 would probably be better. But really, it's going to be very hard to get into the interviewing situation unless you've already had some contact with at least a couple of people or even just one person at the relevant institution, right? I mean, this is not really an academic job search model where, you march out here and you go to wherever, the interviews are held nowadays, and that is going to be your first encounter with the committee, and it is entirely possible, and may God grant that it's even probable that will lead to an on-campus and then a job. So that's a sort of a cold interview that can lead to something. That can happen in a think tank environment, but I think it's much tougher. It's better to start with the networking, maybe some external writing, some informational interviews, maybe some co-publications if you're lucky, maybe giving a talk at the think tank. We haven't mentioned that, but that's another avenue if you're doing the right kind of work. And then comes the formal application and the letter and the resume. That's in some ways, the end of the process, whereas in the academy, it's almost really the very beginning of the process.
And I'll just say on the networking, I think we probably all have a lot of tips on that sort of thing. I'm happy to talk to anybody afterwards. Certainly what I've learned and a good amount of skills can give you a cogent, here's what you should think about when networking, here's how to not make it scary and just get out and do it. So happy to talk to anybody.